It's not always about the conversion. It's not always about the sale. The only way to attract attention is to create something that didn't exist before, something that offers some additional value. People might get confused. Consider thinking about a few more options that would be a bit more engaging. I had some unique thoughts about it, research, findings. There are 83 sentences that are too hard to read. I think it's really, really important to build a detailed content outline and just take notes about the type of search intent. There's nothing that helps you better than having those real people behind the screen in your head. You have so many things to do and you don't have time for all these unconnected sections, like trying to make sense or remember something. I think the most important thing is keep pushing the boundaries because it always can be done better.
Tell me a little bit about your content marketing philosophy and how it's evolved over time.
Sure. Yeah. I guess my response would be pretty much in line with what many content marketers talk about these days. So I would say the most important lesson I learned while working in content and especially working at Semrush, um, it's kind of revolves around two main things and being able to balance those two main things. And then the first one is you really need to remember that content marketing can only work well when there's a specified, like, documented strategy behind your content efforts, and that when this strategy, this content strategy, is also aligned with your business strategy and your business goals. Um, so basically, documenting your efforts, your strategy, sometimes it kind of easier said than done, and many struggle with it. I myself struggled a lot, specifically because content is much harder to measure. It's much harder to put in a system. It's much harder to predict. Um, but really, it's worth it. And when I talk about documenting the strategy, it's really putting in one place your understanding of your content audience, your primary goals, the specific metrics that you track, the resources you have, and building this high level plan for achieving those goals. And to kind of prove the point, we at Semrush recently released this State of Content Marketing report for 2022. And part of the research was the survey. And basically, we identified like a segment of companies, of people who said that they were extremely successful with content last year. And then basically 70% of them had a documented strategy compared to, many other companies that actually didn't. And so really what it in reality it comes down to being able to set up your analytics and to track your content marketing efforts. And for small companies, it might be about starting to use Google Analytics more deeply, to add event tracking, and to use SEO tools. For bigger companies who have more resources, it might be about working closely with the analytics team, creating this end-to-end analytics process to really see what kind of results, what kind of business results does your content bring. And so the last thing to add about this first thing that kind of creates my philosophy is that when thinking about those metrics and analytics and content, I think it's very important to take your business specifics into account. So, for example, if you are a B2B company and you know that your sales cycle is really long, then it makes sense to use the multi-touch or like linear attribution instead of, for example, last click, because you know that you have so many touch points in the sales cycle. So it makes sense to understand that content will not necessarily be the last one. Or similarly, if you know that sales team plays a very important role in the conversion process, then you might need to focus on such metrics as MQLs and perhaps work with the sales team to establish other metrics. And because I also do some consultancy, and I saw many companies that just, especially startups, small businesses that come in and say, "Oh, I think we need to create a blog." But why? You know, it's why exactly? Why do you think that blog is what you need at this stage of your company? Uh, do you think it will help you achieve your goals at this stage? And also, do you have other assets like an optimized website to really, make your blog work? So yeah, I mean, all thinking about those things ahead, like before rushing into creating content, I think it's essential, no matter the size of your company. And then the second thing that you need to balance the first thing with is this focus on your audience. And again, everyone talks about it, obviously, that, we need to focus on the audience, on the customers. We need to create beautiful, remarkable experiences. And it's true. And I myself, I keep reimagining it every year, even more often, because it's very easy to get trapped into the business thinking, but we need to prioritize content quality and uniqueness of the information we create in this user experience, not because, we want to rank, not because we want to sell a product. I mean, of course we do, but we need to remember first that we are publishers and people consume our content because you know, they need to learn, they need to answer questions, solve the problem. And I think in B2B SaaS, you feel it especially deeply because, well, people who search for those B2B SaaS related topics, usually they actually turn to companies like ours, like Semrush, for example, because they want to learn something that they can usually cannot even learn, at in their universities, at their MBA programs. And it's our responsibility to help them, grow professionally. And so then eventually, when you start to approach content, as a journalist, as a media publisher, and you really try to move it to the next level, um, this is when you can better reach your goals, whatever it might be, lead gen or ranking or traffic or anything else. So, one thing follows another. And so eventually for me, it's really about balancing this business thinking, always trying to track things, to forecast things, to see how content is aligned with your business strategy. And also with stepping in the shoes of your audience and acting as journalists and educators. And well, the very last thing here, promise, is I would say continuous learning, because I sometimes feel like, okay, now I'm the expert. I know exactly what I do. I know how to do content marketing right. No, not really. You just keep learning. And I think it's very important to just, again, to always look at what other companies do, to listen, to read, to see what the experts in the industry say, to listen to your colleagues, work with different teams in the company to understand the consumer. So you just keep learning because it's really a never ending process.
I have so many places to jump off on that. And thank you so much for all of that. So, one of the major things for me, we're talking about attribution, and I've talked about attribution quite a bit with a few different content marketers, especially Melissa Eisenberg from DocuSign. And the question about that is really around the socialization of that idea and that concept. I know that I personally have had a hard time advocating for uh, attribution in the first place, let alone the right model, especially based on the sales cycle that we have. And the difference between talking about attribution for content marketing versus PPC, where a lot of companies' heads are at. Can you tell me a little bit about what that conversation has been like for you in the past?
Yeah, sure. And again, I would just like make a remark here is, that in bigger companies, well, like ours, with big marketing teams, we just like luckily for us, we just have, the resources to actually work with the analytics team that, help you set up things. Because obviously, in very small companies and small startups, like it usually happens differently. And, you start small. You just, well, I would say this attribution conversation, it doesn't happen that early for those companies. But for bigger companies, and my previous company was also pretty big, let's just say. Um, well, I mean, one thing is to obviously even establish this, this process to have like the dashboards to to have all to have all of your assets that you operate with, like to attribute it to specific content categories, to specific funnels, to specific teams, like to be able to organize those assets. um, but in terms of the types of attribution, like attribution models, I think, well, it is a big question, and for us, it's also like being debated. What kind of model should you use? So, I mean, I can only say that I personally think, as I mentioned before, for content, I think, the value that content adds, it's especially, high level, like top of the funnel awareness content. It's not always about the conversion. It's not always about the sale. Well,
Right.
because it's not an ad. And I mean, unless we talk about product pages or like, in like basic landing pages, but it does add to this whole buyer's journey, to someone like starting to know you, to someone starting to consider you. So that's why I think this multi-touch model makes more sense, because we see that content makes a contribution. And also in reality, I would say, still, it's not all about the sale when it comes to content. So you also look at other metrics. It's not always easy to measure awareness, for example, but you can still think look at things like, well, rankings. You can look at traffic. You can look at whatever interactions and engagements, shared mentions you have on social media. You can look at, you can try to measure your thought leadership, but look by looking at whether experts in the industry, for example, share your content or comment your content or recommend you. So yeah, I think it's a complex thing. And again, it depends on, what exactly you're looking for right now at this stage of your company. So let's say if you really, really need leads and you're just starting, well, you would perhaps focus more on the bottom of the funnel where you can track easier, let's say, how does it let's say, contribute to conversion. So yeah, going back to your goals and, whatever resources you have for those processes.
Yeah, and I've had a bunch of conversations myself where I'll tell people you want to start. It goes back to the documentation part of the conversation, right? You have to be able to document, and if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, document what the different goals are for the different pieces of content that you're putting out there, and then set your attribution based on those goals and what you're trying to measure along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
how are you planning based on what you know about your audience and what you know about the business goals?
To answer it best, perhaps I could just sort of, just explain this whole process, which kind of starts, with analyzing the audience, and then it ends with actually producing the content. Let me just try to explain the process, and perhaps I will answer the question about balancing while, I explain it. But if you still have follow-up questions about that specifically, happy to answer. Let's just imagine you are a startup. You don't have anything in place. You just hired a content marketeer and you decide that you want to create content. So obviously here the first step is the audience research. And so I personally was very lucky to have this experience of doing the actual cost of interviews myself. So actually hopping on the call with customers, trying to find out who they are, what they feel, how they feel, what they want, what they do. And folks from content marketing don't usually do that, but I would really recommend trying. Perhaps trying to communicate with the product marketing team or sales team, and joining those calls, or at least like watching the recordings. So for me, it really helps not only like revision, reshape the target personas for the content, and kind of going deeper than those product related pain points and just looking at the bigger picture. What kind of challenges do those people have in general, that we can help with our content, which is also aligned with what we as a company offer in our mission statement. um yeah, so but also it helps you to make your content more human. There is nothing that helps you better than actually, having those real people behind the screen in your head, just um imagining that you're actually writing for them, knowing how they speak, how they communicate, what kind of challenges they have. It's really useful. So, and after this audience research stage, um, this is, where you got the more of like business planning comes in, overall goal setting, and, let's say if you're this startup, you can look at, for example, you have a plan for the year. Um, you have a specific number of, I don't know, sales, leads, registrations, whatever, in plan, and you can either look at the benchmark from the past or just estimate, whether your content can help you achieve any of those goals. If it's, for example, so for me specifically, I kind of, the way I approach this is I look at sort of different layers of metrics. I start with more like secondary metrics, let's say things like organic and ranking. And then I sort of looking at the historical performance, I try to estimate. So let's say, if we manage to increase traffic by this percentage, um, and we also had this kind of the sales goal in mind, how many more trials or like signups, etc., we can get. So like basically playing around with the goals that we have for the company, the historical performance, and kind of our understanding of how those different metrics and different parts, like different content, affects each other. And also thinking about, again, going more granular with like more specific metrics, and thinking about resources and budget. And then moving to a more like high level content plan. So thinking about the funnel, and what I mean is the content marketing funnel. So basically, what types of content you will be creating, to sort of will capture people at different stages, and then moving those people, from one stage to another, ideally. And then also kind of estimating based on this audience research that we did before, what kind of high level topics and, content formats and also distribution promotional channels, we might need to focus on, let's say, in this timeline, for example, this year, on this quarter. And then eventually, I moved to, creating the actual content calendar, editorial calendar, which includes, running a deeper topic research, which is followed by keyword research and, organizing, those keywords into kind of thematical groups or clusters, establishing the timeline based on our resources, our goals, and setting specific KPIs for each piece. And also, I saw it, especially over the past few years. I saw that, planning your content sort of in thematic campaigns, can be pretty effective. So, instead of just, like randomly, chaotically publishing blog posts, ebooks, etc., trying to organize, let's say, in December, we know that people start planning, and start maybe like mapping their content strategy for next year. So why don't we launch a campaign about content strategy in December/January, and have several, connected, repurposed into each other pieces. We would have, let's say, a gated piece of content, blog posts, video, etc., etc. So this kind of campaign-based planning for me proved to be pretty effective, because you create more awareness, you use different channels, and you also repurpose one thing into another. So you kind of save resources at the same time. Um, and then, for, after you have all those strategy and planning related things in place, I would say you obviously move to the production part. And here, what I would mention is it's for every piece that you create, spending enough time, one, on research, because, well, as we all know right now, like the only way to really, really well rank or attract attention is to create something that didn't exist before, or like, something that offers some additional value, had some unique thoughts about it, research, findings, etc. So really, going after, this research based pieces that provide value, and then making sure you spend enough time on creating, a very detailed brief. So unless you write yourself, but in any case, I think it's really, really important to build like a detailed content outline before you or your writer starts writing. So let's say if I work with copywriters, I would usually create this outline myself. So it obviously takes me a lot of time. But then, you really make sure that you have all the structure in place, and then the copywriter or like you later only need to add the meat to the bones. And this, outline would obviously involve a lot of like SERP and search intent and SERP analysis, research, and things of the sort. Yeah, and then obviously, finally, you publish the content, you edit it, doing the quality, sort of the quality control part, which I guess, we will talk about when we do the editing piece. Yeah, and then you have promotion, repurposing, and continuous audit, which is, I guess, the last thing to add is that, especially for websites that already have a lot of content, really auditing your content like at least a couple of times per year, and you know improving some of the pieces that already rank. For example, it can actually add so much more value than sometimes even creating new content. So yeah, just I would say never forget about content audits. So yeah, that's the answer.
No, I love it. I think that's fantastic. And there are so many different places that I could jump off on this. However, I want to make sure that we stick to the format. You've done all of that. You've done the audience research. You've aligned this to the business goals. You've got everything you need. Now let's talk about your pregame once you go into the actual edit itself.
The first kind of step is to make sure we to analyze the overall structure of the article, um, assess the topic coverage, how well we cover the topic, if the information is complete, and also if it matches the search intent. I mean, obviously here I talk about kind of ungated content like blog posts. Um, and overall, this part about the structure and search intent, it usually happens at the brief stage, when you create the outline. But in general, it kind of involves, first of all, just Googling your keyword and looking at those, at least, the first like 5 to 10 articles that rank on the first page, and just take notes about the type of search intent, commercial, informational, branded, etc. But also type of content, uh, content formats, approximate length, structure, the questions covered in each piece, and also looking at things like the headline of the article, the H text structure, whether it like lists, basically whether the piece is optimized for skimmers, whether the headline is engaging, and also whether basically the information is in the piece is complete. So making sure that someone who landed on this page will not need to go back to search results because they have all their questions covered. And if there's something, something related that they might be interested in, we can also add links in the piece, let's say. Yeah, so basically looking at whether this whole structure and topic thing is covered, then I just go into looking at the more deeply in the writing piece, analyzing each section, whether it's engaging, whether it provides enough information at from the very start, if there are actionable takeaways, if we make any point, do we provide an explanation? Then looking at readability, if we have sentences or paragraphs that are too long, looking at if we have enough spaces, and then obviously grammar, spelling, tone of voice consistency. Third thing is the visuals. Do we have images, video, etc., to just break down those chunks of text? Number four is the product mentions. If we have them, are they correct? Do they look organic? Like, are they integrated organically, or do they look salesy? And if they are not included, can we include some if it makes sense? And number five is more like technical SEO kind of things. Like if we have primary keywords included, secondary and related keywords included, Again, H tag structure, meta tags, links, and alt attributes. So yeah, I would say those are the main steps for me.
I think the really cool part about what you're saying here too is that from the top down, everything becomes reader centric and then all the way down to business centric. And one thing that I've kind of my own personal philosophy over the years that's changed is at one point I said, people don't want to use the product or people don't want product mentions down their, being crammed down their throats. And if they're on the website, clearly they know that they're there. And then after, you know, doing my own research and talking to people, if you're doing it organically, which I think SEMrush does a fantastic job at, and anybody here watching should pay attention to this. Um, if you're doing it in a very smart way, people want solutions to these problems that they're looking for and not have to beat around the bush when it comes to seeing, hey, how do I solve this? And I think what that really comes down to is practice and technique. And I think SEMrush is really a great company to follow along with that because it is integrated in such an organic way where it's a natural conclusion to what's being done in the piece. Cool. All right, let's move forward. Before
Yeah.
we jump in entirely, what was your first impression of this piece?
Well, that it's really long and that it's very text heavy and complicated, that kind of thing, which but honestly, that's the thing, it's not really about how I feel about it because, well, if that's what our audience is looking for, then, be it. But I think it's not. But, to find out what kind of, what the audience is actually looking for when they type in the keyword, this is actually where this SERP analysis, search intent examination comes in. Yeah, so and I'll, let me just show you like quickly how I would approach this. So let's say in terms of the keywords, it looks like our main keyword would be revenue operations. So also the keyword difficulty for this one is not extremely high, so it looks more or less doable. Just a good thing to notice. Anyway, so if we type it in Google and see what kind of results we have, let's just quickly analyze first what we see here. So we see that there's a feature snippet for the definition, which you can keep in mind and maybe try to read it over. Then we can see some of the questions people ask, and this is something we can also use to structure the piece ourselves. For example, what is revenue operations and versus sales operations. And then, so when we look at the titles, so articles that rank first, so most of them are approach the what is question. What is revenue operation? How does it create value? Um, what is rev ops? What is rev ops? What is revenue operation? Complete guide. What is revenue operation? So what I'm trying to say here that it looks like it is a what is piece, which basically means that someone who doesn't know what revenue operation is and tries to think of, oh, do I actually need it in my company? So they would type in this keyword and they would, just try to get this more or less high level information, like the main things you need to know about revenue operations if you don't know anything about it. So this is the impression I had. And basically, and the reason why we're looking at SERP, I mean, this whole thing in general, right, is because, I mean, obviously, Google's algorithms are not always perfect. We know that. But what Google is trying to do is it's trying to show on the first page the content that kind of corresponds in the best way to the search intent of the person. So if all of those pieces kind of have a similar structure and type, then it means that most likely this is what people are actually looking to see. So it gives us some signals. So let's just like quickly look at the first two or 3 or 4 articles just to get what kind of takeaways we can have from here. Okay, looking at this one, so we again there's no intro, so it jumps directly into the what if is section. You know, it has uh, lots of bullet points, lots of lists. It's pretty short, easy to read. So it focuses on several questions like what it is, how does it create focus, how to get started, and do you actually need it, and what are the benefits? If we look at a couple of others, I'm not gonna go to Forbes because it will just break my laptop with ads. um, so looking at this one again, very short intro. What is revenue operation goes first. Um, some infographics, some statistics explaining why revenue operations are rising, why they are important. Also, more infographics, so lots of images. Again, the benefits. So, we know at this point we definitely need to cover the benefits, which makes sense for someone who doesn't know what revenue operations is. um, Also key metrics, and again, how do you know if you need rep ops? And I think it's important because again, it shows us if it's someone who doesn't know and tries to understand if their company actually needs this kind of thing, or maybe it doesn't. And let's look maybe just one more. So here again, very short intro. What is structure? Why? And I kind of like it a lot because it's very easy to follow. Again, very visual, and it has this kind of workflow, which with like, steps on how do you implement rep ops in your company. So again, by looking at all those articles, we can already say that, well, they are well structured. They focus on someone who is just starting with Rep Ops, just trying to understand what is this whole thing about. Using lots of lists, subsections, lots of white spaces and images. Now, let's look at our piece, which is a bit different. Anyway, so the first thing I would look at, here we have the title tag, meta description, and the title. So the title tag doesn't look bad. I mean, it's slightly different from other pieces because each article has this what if structure. So maybe we want to do things differently. But I would still consider maybe thinking about a few more options that would be a bit more engaging. The meta description. So I left a comment here. So it's really aligned with what you see if you go to SERP. So sometimes, we write one meta description and Google just chooses to show a piece of from the article. And here, yeah, and here basically every piece has kind of this revenue ops is, which again, because it's a what is piece. So this is more or less what we do here. Again, maybe I would consider just playing with it a bit more. Just what if like Google actually shows our meta description, in this case trying to make it more engaging because like it can impact your CTR on the SERP. Now the title. So another comment I left to just be careful because we have this title and the title tag and this title. I mean, I know like it can be good practice to have a more descriptive title, which is can increase clicks on social and whatnot. But one possible potential risk is that people might get confused because, for example, in title tag, you have revenue operations teams. That's it. But then let's say you clicked on it and you suddenly see this rev ops. It might be fine, right? But it might also feel like you opened something that you didn't click on, so mismatch of the expectation. So yeah, I would just be careful with that. Maybe like at least let's say, include the rev ops here in the title, like think of more options. But also if this company sees that, well, having the different title tag and different title like continuously delivers good results, then it's one thing. If there is no data to say so, I mean, again, maybe we should even have the same title and title tag. It's debatable, obviously.
Something
Um,
that stands out to me about that as well is that We've got revenue operations in the title tag, but then RevOps in the title itself, with
Yeah.
RevOps being sort of a shorthand that, if we're looking at the what is, might not be completely familiar with the audience. It's a small
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
but using that shorthand with an unfamiliar audience might be a bit tricky.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, because here, you see most of the pieces they have revenue operations, brackets, rev ops. So yeah, that's why I think, maybe like at least if you include this in the title would make things a bit easier for the reader to understand. It's basically the same kind of thing. Um, cool. So let's move to the actual piece. Um, so the first thing that kind of comes kind of brought my attention is that there's a very long intro. Again, especially compared to those articles that we have just seen. And then the rest of them, I looked over like from the first page, they all have a pretty short intro or no intro at all. So I mean, first of all, consider shortening this because again, I think this is the section that is most important. People would need to be able to jump to it quickly. Um, but also here, like we're trying to do some storytelling, adding a quote, coming from somewhere, some background. I think it's the best practice, at least that we try to follow at Semrush, for use the intro to just explain the reader what is this piece going to be about, and why they should care in like 2-3 lines. So, after reading this, you will be able to, well, understand what RevOps are, understand if you need them in your company, and understand how do you implement it, that kind of thing. So that would be the first comment. And actually, I don't know how the actual blog looks like when it's published. For example, we have like an automatic table of content that just pops up and it's cool. But if it's not the case, it's really, really important to add the table of contents, especially when your article is 4,000 words. You know, it can really help the reader to jump where they need to. So just something to keep in mind. All right, moving to the first section. What is revenue operations? So the first thing here is if we go back to the featured snippet, we see that it has a definition style thing. So like revenue operation, rev ops is the alignment of sales, marketing, customer success, etc., etc. And I think for definition, Google really likes it when we follow the structure. So the term is. So here, I think we go about it a bit differently. So we make things a bit complicated, like at its core, revenue operations is responsible for, etc., etc. So if we want to try reading the featured snippet, I would consider changing it to the structure of revenue operations or rev ops is, and then just changing this whole thing. Next, moving next. Just as an example, so for me this looks a bit long and it might look more or less fine on the document, but on the blog, especially the font is bigger, it might actually look a bit massive. So what I would usually do if I see something like this, I would just try to break it down to several sentences because it really is easier to read it like this, and especially if you're on your phone, for example. Next comment I have here is, I think for most of the pieces that I saw, this section was also very brief and short, but I think it's really good that the author kind of integrates our own director of revenue. It's really cool when companies actually talk about their own experience. I think it's valuable, so I would keep it. But maybe consider, maybe it could become a like H3 section, where we say like key areas of focus. For example, could, again, make it a bit easier for the for skimmers and also, a bit more readable for search engine because of the H, like more advanced H structure. I mean, not necessary, but could be an idea. Okay, moving next. What does a revenue operation team look like? So here, the first thing that came into my mind that again, we have a paragraph which could become a list. So for example, we say that Revenue operations team is made up of multiple groups. And then, if we do something like sales reps and account executives, obviously editing this whole thing, but and customer support, etc., etc. So for me, again, this kind of experience, it's easier to digest it than just this big paragraph. Going next. Oh yeah, yes, and I actually about the quotes. So the whole article has lots of quotes, um, which I think sometimes it might make the reading experience, just complicated. It's hard because you have all the quotes, you switch, and it's just hard to read. But also having quotes in general is a good thing. So one thing I would suggest is, using some whether either visual elements in your CMS or turning the quote into an image, but doing something to highlight it from the normal text. I just add an example of my article here, just to show how we do that. So here, this is an example. When we interview an expert, we visualize a quote like this. So it actually acts a bit as like an image, so it helps to break down those chunks of text. But also, I would say in this piece in general, some of the quotes, they don't actually add value. They just make things more complicated to read and to digest. So I would go through each quote again and to really kind of ask yourself, does this quote add something new, or it does it just add more text, which doesn't help at all. It doesn't write any actionable advice. Yeah. So going next, here again, this is a big piece of text with two big quotes. Yeah, this whole thing. I think if I remember correctly, it kind of talks about that you need to hire senior executives first, um, and then you go to hiring more of like junior level folks, that sort of thing. Um, for me, it felt like we can turn it into one or two sentences and just add one quote. So it's again, I didn't go like very deeply into analyzing the text, but if we can say something in a more easy, like in an easier way, it shorter, better do it like this because this looks scary even on the doc. And again, looking at other articles that rank, people are expecting something easy to digest quickly, but also easy to remember. All right, let's go next. So, what are the primary goals of RevOps team? So, as we saw in those articles that we analyzed, they all have most of them have a section that says like why is it important or like what are the benefits, and also how do you know if you actually need RevOps. And yeah, I think for me, so I would change, like restructure this section into something that tries to answer this question. Because for me, the primary goals, it's something that you think about, that you're kind of already plan it. You are the actual person who manages RevOps teams and you're trying to see, okay, what are the goals? But the person who's looking to find out what RevOps are cares more about, does like that do I actually have to care about it, and do I actually need it? So yeah, I would change this, turn it into something like how do you know if you need RevOps and what are the benefits. And again, I would work on this whole structure because we have lots of text, we have lots of quotes. And then I would maybe, I would rework this whole thing. I would maybe look at this six core functions, push it a bit up, and provide like explanations to each of them. And yeah, and also think of, can we add some guidelines? So let's say we have first the benefits, 1, 2, 3 in the list, and then some guidelines. So let's say if you have this type of an issue in your company, oh, you need RevOps, that sort of thing. And just using the information we have here, maybe some additional research to kind of restructure this whole thing. All right. Because yeah, in reality, the goals and benefits are close to another, but sort of not the same thing for me. All right, what revenue operations models? So, to be honest, I feel like we don't need this section at all because look at this. This is scary. I mean, this looks very complicated and sophisticated. Again, I feel like someone who already manages a revenue operations teams might want to know, right? What kind of model, how should I use, how should I structure our work processes? But for someone who looks to find out if what RevOps are and if I need it, I don't think they would, they would probably be scared by this and might actually bounce. And our goal, right, is to make sure the person reads through the end, stays long, and ideally doesn't go anywhere else, doesn't go back to the cert. So I would, yeah, I mean, I would consider removing this somehow and maybe just using it for a separate article or another article that targets a different type of intent and maybe a different, different persona. Okay, next section. How do RevOps teams get work done? So this looks like this. Let me just show an example that we looked at before, I think. So it looks like a workflow, where we can explain in steps 1, 2, 3. How do you kind of potentially, or at least I would change it for this section. How can you kind of implement on or like create an effective RevOps teams? So this piece does it nicely. I showed before. Did you see like how do I start implementing phase 1, 2, 3, 4? So I would consider turning into something like this, having steps, using the H3 text for the steps. And if we scroll down, we also have this, what does it take to build a high achieving RevOps team? Uh, yeah, I would remove the section, and if we can use some of the information to fuel this kind of workflow, workflow section where we just explain and remove this like duplicate section that just create more confusion. Because again, I think our goal, right, is to answer all questions, but do it in the less painful way, so that the person that opens the article like just doesn't, feel nervous or stressed because like there's so much to learn. And well, I mean, it happens to me sometimes. You just open an article, like no, because you have so many things to do because you actually work and you don't have time to like trying to um work around your anxiety from like going through all this like unconnected sections, like trying to make sense or remember something. Similar comment here. What does a revenue operation tech stack looks like? I would reword this into easy to follow section with lists. Let's say types of tech stack. Let's say tech stack for like first type, and then add maybe specific like tools with links, because other articles on the first page I haven't seen them linking to like specific tools you can use. So it could be something we could do differently here. And again, yeah, just working on the structure, making it easy to follow. Um, like I think one of the sort of, yeah, I mean they all have this kind of approach, right? Like the text and some bullet points. I think it's could be also could work around here, and also adding those H3 tags, which could be beneficial for ranking as well. And well, the last, no, almost last section, again, looks how the revenue operations evolve. I mean, also it looks massive. We could create a whole separate blogs on RevOps trends, and we can keep this section, I guess. But instead of adding all this, we have those kind of 4 pillars, which like list the main trends, maybe focus on them, just add some explanations and call it a day. And finally, we have this section, which also feels like completely not unconnected with the rest. Like, why does it appear here? I'm not sure. But so, what types of roles does RevOps play in sales experience? So, if we go to SERP, we have this exact question. What is revenue operations versus sales operation? So, I mean, people definitely want to know that. And again, if we kind of change a bit this whole chunks of text experience maybe turn some of the quotes into the actual text with references. I don't know, but I would also move this up to the section where we talk about how RevOps get things done, because it's more, it's about your interactions with the sales team and other teams. Yeah, and I mean, and there are some of the things that we actually don't cover. For example, I saw that a few of the articles on the first page, they talked about Revo metrics, for example. So we don't cover it here, but since we can remove some of the sections, like this one, might have space for adding metrics and whatever else we might be missing if we go a bit more deeply into analyzing like related questions based on the keyword and the topic. Yeah, and the final thing about the structure, we don't have a conclusion. So I would add one, summarizing the main points and takeaways, and also think about if we can have any call to action added. And quickly before we end, like about the second step, where I would go deeper into analyzing the actual writing part. I'm using our Semrush writing assistant tool. I'm just going to quickly show how it works. It actually, you can share it with anyone, any writer, and they don't need to be logged in Semrush, which is great. So just to prove the point, we have very big readability issues. So, based on those top 10 articles that already rank for the keyword, like your optimal readability level should be 50 out of 100, I guess. No, well, anyway, 50. And ours is 35. So it's really hard to follow and read. So there are 83 sentences that are too hard to read. And, you can go to each one and see, well, if you can, maybe sometimes it's about like breaking into two sentences. Sometimes it's about just making it easy to read. And same thing for like words that are too complicated, like unnecessary, like this one, for example. Uh, yeah, so this would be the second part, just looking at readability, making things easier to digest. Also looking at grammar and spelling. So I'm using Grammarly, as you can see here, which is a great tool as well. And then finally, like the SEO piece. So here it looks like we're doing a good job. So we're using the target keywords. We're also using the recommended semantically related keywords. Well, many of them. We might, they need to remember about the old attributes, and everything else seems to be in place. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like, in reality, the process would be more in depth, but in a nutshell, this is how I would approach this.
I think what's really great, and this was one of the most detailed analysis that we've had on the show, and I really, really appreciate that. What I really appreciate the most was the showing us how the tool works as well in there. And just one comment I want to make is that this would be a perfect jumping off piece for many of these other titles or these other pieces that might not be search optimized. However, are still very important to the overall conversation. Would you be able, Margarita, to give us some final words of wisdom? Then we will wrap it all up.
I think the most important thing is just keep like pushing the boundaries in terms of again moving to becoming this like publisher and educator. And I mean, I'm just lucky to work in a company where we constantly have access to great minds and colleagues that like show you how it can be done better, because it always can be done better. And I think doing those such simple things is, well, looking at your competitors, analyzing what's done, what works best, what doesn't work, and actually immersing yourself into audience research, even if you as a quantum marketing marketer don't normally do that. All this can, well, really help you, make your work much more better, but also make you as a professional more, experienced and valuable.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Margarita, for coming on. I would like to encourage our audience members who are live now to tune in next week while we have Ryan Law from the Animals Agency, one of the industry leading content marketing agencies out in the space. Fantastic episode ahead. We'll be talking about GPT-3, coming up with a very solid premise, and a number of other really cool things. Margarita, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I very much appreciate your time. Have a wonderful rest of the day.